The night Sarah told me she'd found her soulmate, I didn't even flinch. It sounds cold, I know, but the truth is, a strange calm washed over me. It was like I'd been holding my breath for 15 years, and suddenly, I could finally exhale. For the first time in what felt like forever, I slept soundly. Let me back up, because this wasn't some sudden, dramatic implosion. This was a slow burn, years in the making, the kind of quiet unraveling that you only see clearly in hindsight. I'm David, 41, and I work as a lineman for the power company. That means I'm up climbing poles in blizzards, working overnight when transformers blow, coming home coated in a kind of grime that never truly washes out. It's dangerous work, the kind where you're one slip away from becoming a statistic, but it pays. And it pays well. Well enough that for the past 12 years, Sarah hasn't worked a single day. Well enough that I bought our house, a 3-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood with a yard and a 2-car garage, outright, before we even got married. Well enough that I've covered every single bill, every grocery run, every one of her random hobbies she'd pick up and drop within 3 months. And well enough that I'd been paying $4,500 every single month for her mother, Mrs. Jenkins, at Evergreen Memory Care, a private facility with actual nurses and therapy programs, not some bare minimum local public care facility. Sarah is 39. She's beautiful, in that effortless way that makes people assume she's got it all together. She does hot yoga 3 times a week, has a closet full of designer athletic wear, and speaks fluent Instagram about self-care and finding your authentic self. For 12 years, her job has basically been finding herself. She tried photography, then pottery, then life coaching without any actual certification, then something involving crystals that I just stopped asking about. I didn't mind it at first, genuinely. I thought we were building something, a partnership where I handled the financial pressure, and she handled everything else. Except that everything else kept shrinking until it was basically just her own schedule and her own interests. The signs started small, the way these things always do. New friends I'd never met. A sudden, passionate interest in art galleries, which was funny because she'd always said museums were boring. She started dressing differently, not for me, but for whenever she went out, which became 2 or 3 nights a week. Her phone became an extension of her hand, always face down on the counter, always buzzing with messages that made her smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. I'm not an idiot, and I'm not the jealous type, so I didn't immediately jump to conclusions. I just stopped asking questions and started paying attention. Here's something I learned the hard way: when someone stops caring, if you notice their change in behavior, they've already checked out emotionally. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd worked a double shift. A storm had knocked out power to half the county. 16 hours straight in freezing rain, and I came home expecting, I don't know, maybe some sympathy, or at least a hot meal. Instead, Sarah was sitting in the living room with this energy, this nervous excitement, like she'd been waiting for me. She asked if we could talk, and I knew right then what was coming. I sat down, still in my work boots, and she told me about Liam. He's a creative consultant, whatever that means. They met at some gallery opening her new friend dragged her to. It just happened, she said, like she'd tripped and fallen into emotional intimacy. We connected on this deep level, spiritually, you know? I didn't know, but I nodded. She kept going, talking about how Liam understood her, how he was genuine and authentic, and all these words that basically meant he wasn't me. Money means nothing to him, she said again, like that was supposed to impress me. He lives in this tiny apartment and makes art, and he's just so real. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything or demand she leave, or any of that dramatic stuff you see in movies. I just asked if she was planning to leave me for him. She got this look, half guilty, half annoyed, like I was missing the point. I don't know, she said. I just needed to be honest with you about what I'm feeling. That's when it hit me. She wanted permission. She wanted me to give her my blessing to explore this thing with Liam, while keeping all the comfort and security I provided. She wanted to eat her cake and have it too. And she genuinely seemed to think I'd just sit there and take it. Have you ever had someone confess something terrible to you and expect you to thank them for their honesty? So, I told her I needed to think. I kissed her on the forehead, like nothing had changed, and went upstairs. Instead of going to bed, I sat on the edge of our mattress, pulled up my phone, and texted Michael, my lawyer. He's the guy who handled my house purchase and my will years ago. I gave him 3 very specific instructions. Close her credit lines immediately. Stop all payments for her mother's memory care facility, explaining I was no longer financially responsible. Confirm the house as separate property, purchased before marriage. He responded within 5 minutes with one word, done. Then he followed up, asking if I wanted to meet Friday morning. I said yes. Sarah thought I was processing, maybe even coming around to her enlightened perspective on love and soulmates. She smiled at me the next morning over coffee, gave me this grateful look like I was being so mature and understanding. She had no idea that by the time she woke up, her safety net had already started to disappear. The joint credit cards where she was an authorized user were already frozen. The call to Evergreen had already been made, informing them that I would no longer be responsible for Mrs. Jenkins's care, and they should contact the family immediately for the payment due next week. The house she'd been living in rent-free for over a decade was legally confirmed as mine, and mine alone, purchased 2 years before we even got married. I went to work that morning like it was any other day. Climbed poles, fixed lines, came home exhausted. Sarah was out, probably with Liam, probably feeling like she'd finally broken free from whatever cage she'd imagined our marriage to be. I made myself dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed early. Friday was going to be interesting, and I wanted to be rested for it. She thought she'd found her soulmate, someone genuine who didn't care about money. That was about to be tested in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Because when you spend 12 years not working, and not building anything of your own, money suddenly matters a whole lot. And honestly, I slept like a baby, knowing what was coming. Friday started normal for me and apparently ended in complete chaos for Sarah, though I didn't find out the details until much later. I went to work at 6 in the morning, spent 8 hours replacing insulators on a transmission line, and came home around 4 to find 19 missed calls and a dozen text messages, all from my wife. I didn't listen to the voicemails right away because I already knew what had happened. And honestly, I wanted to take a shower first. When I finally sat down with a beer and pressed play, the progression was almost entertaining. The first message was confused, asking why her credit card got declined at some trendy spot in Midtown. The second was annoyed, saying there must be some mistake with the bank. By message 9, she was crying. By message 14, she was screaming. The restaurant incident was perfect timing, completely unplanned by me, but beautiful in its simplicity. Sarah had taken Liam to lunch at some place with small plates and big prices, probably trying to show him that she had resources, that she wasn't just some housewife having a midlife crisis. The card declined in front of him, in front of the server, in front of other tables who definitely noticed. She tried pulling out another card from the same account. Same result. Liam apparently offered to pay, which he did, but you could hear in her voice how humiliating it was. This genuine artist who didn't care about money had to rescue her from a $70 lunch bill. And something about that moment seemed to shift things between them, though she didn't say it directly. The real panic came from the call she got about 2 hours later. Evergreen Memory Care doesn't mess around when it comes to payment, and their billing department is ruthlessly efficient. They called Sarah directly since I'd given them her number as the family emergency contact when I informed them I was no longer financially responsible. The woman on the phone was polite but firm, explaining that next week's payment of $4,500 needed to be arranged immediately, and if the family couldn't commit to continued payment, they'd have to begin the process of transitioning Mrs. Jenkins to a local public care facility. Sarah completely lost it, according to what she screamed at me later. She told them there was a mistake, that I always paid, that this was impossible. They told her to contact the family member who'd been handling payments, and that's when she called me 8 times in a row. I let it go to voicemail every single time. I wasn't being cruel. I was being strategic, and there's a difference. Every hour she spent panicking was an hour she spent realizing exactly what her life actually cost and who'd been paying for it. When I finally called her back around 6 that evening, she told me she was at Liam's apartment, which I found darkly funny. She didn't even say hello before launching into it, demanding to know what I'd done, why her cards didn't work, what was happening with Evergreen. I kept my voice level, almost bored, and told her I was no longer covering her expenses and that her mother was her responsibility, not mine. There was this long silence, and then she started crying. Real ugly crying, not the pretty kind she did when she wanted sympathy. She came home around 9 that night, and Liam didn't come with her. She walked in looking destroyed, mascara everywhere, and immediately launched into this speech about how I was punishing her for being honest, how I was being vindictive and controlling. I let her talk herself out, standing in the kitchen with my arms crossed. And when she finally stopped to breathe, I told her the truth. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "You wanted honesty, so here it is. I'm done." She actually laughed at first, this sharp, disbelieving sound. And then she got mean. She told me I'd regret this, that her lawyer would destroy me, that I owed her for 12 years of marriage. She listed everything she thought she deserved: the house, half my pension, alimony, continued payment for her mother's care. She said I couldn't just cut her off, that she'd given me the best years of her life. I didn't argue, because arguing with her was pointless. Instead, I went upstairs and called Michael again, told him she was threatening legal action, and asked him to expedite the divorce filing. He said he'd have papers ready by Monday and that I should document everything, keep records of all communications, and absolutely not engage emotionally, no matter what she said. The next morning, Sarah was gone before I woke up, and I went about my day like normal. I worked, came home, made dinner, watched TV. It felt weird how not weird it felt, like I'd been carrying this weight for so long that I didn't even notice it until it was gone. The real bomb dropped about a week later when I met with Michael, and he brought in a forensic accountant named Dr. Evelyn Reed. She was this sharp woman in her 50s who looked like she could smell financial deception from 3 states away, and Michael had hired her to go through our accounts with a fine-tooth comb. What Dr. Reed found made my stomach drop, even though I thought I was prepared for anything. There was a credit card I didn't know about, opened in Sarah's name about 18 months ago. Dr. Reed explained that Sarah had likely listed our household income on the application, which is technically legal for a spouse, even if it's ethically questionable when done secretly. The balance was $11,000, and every single charge was what you'd expect: hotels, restaurants, jewelry, lingerie stores. The timeline didn't match with Liam, though. These charges went back a year and a half, which meant Liam wasn't the beginning. He wasn't even the middle. He was just the latest name in a pattern I'd been too busy working to notice. Dr. Reed walked me through it with printouts and highlighted dates, showing me charges at hotels 20 minutes from our house, dinner reservations for 2 at places I'd never been, purchases from stores I'd never heard Sarah mention. She explained that the spending pattern suggested multiple relationships over an extended period, with the charges changing every few months in terms of price points and locations, but maintaining a consistent pattern of deception. Michael just watched me, probably waiting for me to explode or break down, but I felt weirdly calm. It wasn't a betrayal anymore. It was evidence, and evidence was something I could use. Sarah's lawyer, some aggressive guy named Mr. Henderson, reached out the following week. He sent a formal demand letter outlining everything Sarah wanted. It was extensive: the house sold with proceeds split 50-50, half my pension, alimony of $3,000 a month for 6 years, and continued coverage of her mother's medical expenses. The letter cited her contributions as a homemaker, the standard of living she'd become accustomed to, and my substantially higher income. It was professionally written and completely disconnected from reality. Michael responded with our own letter, attaching Dr. Reed's preliminary findings and suggesting mediation before this got messier than it needed to be. Ben, my best friend since high school, came over one night with pizza and beer, and I told him everything. He'd never liked Sarah much. Always said she treated me like an ATM with a heartbeat, but he'd kept quiet because that's what good friends do. He asked if Liam was still in the picture, and I told him no, that Sarah hadn't heard from him in days. Turns out genuine artists who don't care about money also don't care about $4,500 nursing home bills, I said. Ben almost choked on his beer, laughing, saying he couldn't believe she really thought Liam would step up. I just shrugged and told him she'd thought a lot of things that didn't match reality. The mediation was scheduled for 3 weeks out, which gave Dr. Reed time to complete her full forensic analysis. She found more evidence, including another credit card from 2 years ago with $8,000 in charges that Sarah had paid off by skimming from our joint account a little bit at a time so I wouldn't notice. She found hotel stays, dinner reservations, even some text messages Sarah had been careless enough to send from our family plan phone. Some of the men she could identify through restaurant reservations and social media cross-referencing, though I told her I didn't want names. It didn't matter who they were. It only mattered that I could prove the pattern. Sarah had been living 2 lives, and one of them was funded entirely by me, while she lied to my face about finding herself and seeking spiritual growth and whatever other nonsense she'd fed me over the years. Liam wasn't the beginning. And honestly, he probably wasn't even special. He was just the first one she'd been confident enough to tell me about. The first time she'd gotten so comfortable in her deception that she thought she could make me accept it. She'd wanted permission to keep both lives, the security I provided and the excitement they provided. And when I didn't give it to her, everything started crumbling. Her soulmate disappeared. Real responsibility appeared, and she was living on her sister's couch, scrambling for answers. The mediation was coming, and I had evidence she didn't know existed. She thought she held the cards, but she was about to find out she'd been playing a game she couldn't win. The mediation happened on a Thursday morning in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and institutional furniture polish. Sarah showed up looking like she'd actually tried. Hair done, makeup perfect, wearing this professional outfit I'd never seen before that probably came from her sister's closet. She had Mr. Henderson with her, the aggressive lawyer who'd sent that delusional demand letter. And he had this smug energy like he thought this was going to be easy money. Michael sat next to me with Dr. Reed on his other side. And between the 3 of us, we had 2 bankers' boxes full of documentation. I watched Sarah's eyes flick to those boxes and saw the first crack in her confidence. Just a tiny moment of uncertainty before she covered it with that fake smile she used when she was nervous. Mr. Henderson started strong, laying out Sarah's position like he was performing opening arguments in a trial. He talked about her contributions as a homemaker, the career opportunities she'd supposedly sacrificed to support my dangerous job, the standard of living I'd provided that she deserved to maintain. He mentioned her mother's medical needs, the emotional trauma of this sudden abandonment, my substantially higher income. It was a good performance, very rehearsed, and if I didn't know what was in those boxes, I might have even felt guilty. Sarah sat there nodding along, playing the victim perfectly, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, even though no actual tears appeared. Then Michael opened the first box. He started with the timeline, walking through our marriage year by year, emphasizing that Sarah hadn't worked in 12 years despite being perfectly healthy and capable. He showed documentation of every hobby she'd started and abandoned, every failed business idea I'd funded, every expense I'd covered while she pursued her endless journey of self-discovery. Mr. Henderson tried to interrupt a few times, but the mediator shut him down, and I watched Sarah's face get tighter and tighter as Michael methodically destroyed the narrative she constructed about being a supportive partner. Dr. Reed took over next, and that's when things got really uncomfortable. She laid out the first secret credit card, the $11,000 balance, and I watched all the color drain from Sarah's face. Dr. Reed went through the charges one by one, hotels and restaurants and jewelry, highlighting dates and amounts with this clinical precision that made it impossible to deny or explain away. Mr. Henderson tried to object, calling it a violation of privacy, but Dr. Reed calmly explained that the card was tied to marital assets through the household income claim and was absolutely relevant to the proceedings. Then she brought out evidence of the second credit card, the one with $8,000 in charges from 2 years ago that Sarah had paid off using money systematically skimmed from our joint account. Sarah started crying for real then, not the pretty kind, but the desperate kind. And she looked at me like I was supposed to save her from the consequences of her own choices. I just stared back with nothing, no anger, no sympathy, just this flat emptiness where all my feelings for her used to be. Mr. Henderson called for a break, and they huddled in the corner while he presumably explained how badly this was going. Michael leaned over and asked if I wanted to offer anything, maybe compromise to speed this up, and I told him no. She gets what the law says she gets and nothing more, I said quietly. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. When we reconvened 15 minutes later, Mr. Henderson's whole energy had changed. The smugness was gone, replaced by this tired professionalism of a lawyer who knows he's lost but has to see it through anyway. He made a much smaller counteroffer, $50,000 as a lump sum settlement. No alimony, no claim to the house or pension. Michael didn't even pretend to consider it. He laid out our offer, $3,000 for moving expenses, immediate signing of divorce papers with no contest, complete release of all claims to my assets and income. Sarah actually gasped out loud, and Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted to argue, but Dr. Reed wasn't finished yet. She pulled out the final piece of evidence, a comprehensive timeline she'd constructed showing at least 4 different relationships over the past 2 years, cross-referenced with credit card charges, social media activity, and even some text messages Sarah had carelessly sent from our family plan phone. Dr. Reed explained that this pattern of ongoing infidelity, combined with the financial deception and the fact that the house was separate property purchased before marriage, meant that in Colorado, Sarah had virtually no legal claim to anything beyond what I was offering. Mr. Henderson looked at the documents, looked at his client, and I actually saw him deflate in his chair. He asked for another break, and this time when they huddled, I could see him basically telling her it was over, and she needed to take the deal. The final agreement matched our offer exactly. Sarah got $3,000 for moving expenses. Period. No alimony, no property claims, nothing else. She had to sign a complete release and agree to handle all her own debts, including those secret credit cards. The mediator drew up the paperwork right there, and I watched Sarah sign it with shaking hands, tears dripping onto the pages and smudging the ink slightly. Mr. Henderson packed up quickly, probably eager to get away from this disaster of a case. And Sarah just sat there for a minute after they left, staring at nothing. I stood up to go, and she finally looked at me. "David," she said, her voice cracking. I stopped, but didn't turn around. She asked if we could talk privately, just the two of us, and I told her there was nothing left to say. Michael touched my arm, and we walked out together, leaving her sitting in that conference room with all her choices and consequences laid out in front of her. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later, quick and clean, because there was nothing left to fight about. I heard through Ben, who heard from someone else, that Sarah had found work at a big box store and was still living at her sister's place. Mrs. Jenkins had been moved to a local public care facility, one of those places where the staff is overworked and underpaid, and the residents sit in front of TVs all day. Liam had apparently vanished completely, along with whatever other men she'd been seeing, because it turns out spiritual connections don't survive reality very well. I changed the locks on the house, not because I thought she'd try anything, but because it felt symbolic, like closing a door that should have been closed years ago. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 months after everything was finalized, I was in the garage organizing tools when someone knocked on the front door. It was Sarah, looking smaller somehow, tired in a way that makeup couldn't hide anymore. She asked if she could come in, and I stepped outside instead, closing the door firmly behind me. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that she'd made terrible mistakes, that maybe we could try again and work things out. "I'm different now," she said, her voice taking on that pleading quality I'd never heard from her before. "I understand what I had, what I threw away." I just looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. And then I told her the truth she needed to hear. "You're not sorry for what you did," I said calmly. "You're sorry it didn't work out the way you wanted." She tried to argue, started to explain, but I held up my hand and told her it was time for her to leave. She stood there for another minute like she was waiting for me to change my mind. And when I didn't, she finally walked back to her beat-up car and drove away. I went back inside, and the house was quiet. Really quiet. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. I made dinner for myself, watched a game on TV, went to bed early because I had an early shift the next morning. My life looked almost exactly the same from the outside. Same job, same house, same basic routine. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight anymore. Wasn't funding anyone else's fantasies or paying for anyone else's mistakes or pretending not to notice signs. I absolutely noticed. She'd chased what she thought was a deeper connection, a soulmate, something more real than what we had, and she'd lost everything in the process. I'd lost a wife, but I'd finally found something I'd forgotten I was missing for 15 years, myself, and the peace that comes with not being taken for granted. What do you think about the narrator's approach to dealing with this betrayal?